Hello and welcome back to DeadMooseGaming, and today we are back with Runescape. Today I thought I would do a boss guide for a change, stepping away from the non-bossing activities of the Game Hunter to focus on the Arch-Glacor, a new boss that's been released and one that I thoroughly enjoy. So this is going to be quite a long guide and I'm going to go through several sections. I will put timestamps in the description for each particular section. Those will be my equipment, my inventory, the mechanics, the best way to deal damage, and some other tips and tricks at the end. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so now let's talk about our equipment and inventory. What I will say before we start though is that if you don't have a particular item or spell or anything which I am using, relax, don't worry about it. This boss, the Arch-Glacor, is quite forgiving in terms of that. You can use all sorts of gear. If you're missing a particular bit of gear I have, don't worry about it. I will provide alternatives where applicable, but if not, just use what you think is right for you. Starting with number 1, I have Virtus armor. So I'm using the headpiece, the body, the legs and the boots. I do have augments on the top and the legs. On the top I have Crackling 3, Biting 2 and Dragon Slayer, which obviously isn't going to be very useful for the Arch-Glacor. And for the legs I have Relentless 5 and Enhanced Devoted 4. The main ones there are Relentless 5, Crackling 3 and Biting 2. If you've got better perks, obviously use them. These aren't the best in slot perks, not by any means. And if you've got worse perks, you'll also be fine with using them. For number 2, I have Cinderbane gloves. These are just better than the Virtus gloves because they do poison damage over time, which really stacks up quite nicely. But if you haven't got Cinderbane gloves, use the Virtus gloves. You could probably get away with using Subjugation armor if you really desperately needed to, but I would say at least Virtus is where you want to be. If you've got better armor and you feel like using that, go ahead, but I don't think it's necessary because that will cost a lot more to repair than the Virtus armor. For number 3, I have my Max Cape. This is the best cape I have. If you have the cape you get from the Top Car, I can't remember what the minigame's called, but I'll put it on screen briefly. If you've got that cape, use that because it is better, but the Max Cape is the best cape I have, so that is what I am using. If you've got a Skill Cape of Accomplishment, I think they're called, for doing level 99s. If you haven't got the Max Cape, you can use that as an alternative. Or you can use the Obsidian Cape as an alternative. That will be just fine too. So for number 4, I have an Amulet of Souls. This means when I'm using Soul Split, I heal a lot more than I would normally, which is really great for keeping your health up. You basically don't need food the way I do it. But if you haven't got an Amulet of Souls, a Blood Amulet of Fury would be just fine too, and probably even a normal Amulet of Fury will be okay, but I find the Amulet of Souls to be very useful for the extra healing with Soul Split. For number 5, I have an Illuminated God Book. You get this from the quest Song of the Depths, I do believe, but I will put that on screen just to make sure that I'm correct. It just gives you a little boost to your stats. It's nothing major, but it's nice to have. If you haven't got it, don't worry about it. For number 6, I have a Ring of Vigour. This saves me adrenaline when I'm using my Tsunami and Sunshine abilities. It's nice just to keep your adrenaline up a little bit higher than it would be normally. But again, if you haven't got it, that's absolutely fine. For number 7, I have a Planted Feet switch. In this case, I'm using a Sunspear magic version. Planted Feet just means that my Sunshine lasts longer, which means I can use it more efficiently than I would otherwise. If you haven't got Planted Feet at all, that's absolutely fine. Just don't worry about the Sunspear, just leave it at home. But I would suggest if you do have Planted Feet, putting it on the Sunspear, because you can switch the style of the Sunspear between magic, melee and ranged, so it's more versatile. So you don't need to get the Planted Feet perk 3 times, you can just get it once. And finally here, for number 8, I have a Rune Pouch Large. I shall talk about my runes a little bit more when we go into the inventory, but I find that these pouches are very useful. Okay, so now we are onto the inventory. Once again, this is going to be quite a modular inventory setup, so if there's something you don't have, that's absolutely fine. You don't need the best in slot stuff to do this boss. Take it from me, because I don't have that stuff. We're going to start off with overloads. I am using Elder overloads because they're the best ones I can make. And these are just really useful for any combat activity in the game. Make the highest level overload you can. If you can't make overloads, you can get away with extreme magic and defense potions, and if you can't make those, you can just buy super defense and magic potions off the GE, and they will be somewhat useful for you, but obviously they won't be as good as the overloads. Number 2 is weapon poison plus. This is just free damage because the Arch-Glacor can be poisoned. It stacks really well with the Cinderbane gloves I was talking about a little while ago. Number 3 are super restores. These are just for prayer. You can bring prayer potions if you've got those, but super restores are better. Number 4 is food. I am bringing rocktails. To be honest, you don't really need all that much food once you've got used to the boss, because you'll be healing so much off Soul Split. But it's always good to bring some emergency food, right? You can bring sharks if that's easier for you, or whatever food you have. To complement the super restores and the rocktails, I have an enhanced Excalibur, which you get from the elite, I think, Sears Village achievements or tasks, whatever they're called now, and the Ancient Elven Ritual Shard from the Grand Exchange, and they restore your health and prayer. Those are number 5 and 6. Number 7 is a shield. Just bring whatever shield you have. You can do this with a basic anti-dragon shield if you want. We are going to be using that shield for defensive abilities such as Resonance, which will prove to be quite useful through the fight. Number 8 is an Asylum Surgeon's Ring. You get this from Broken Home, the quest, and you have to complete it within a certain time, and also complete all the challenges. This will save you a little bit of adrenaline, as this will be the main ring I will be using. But if you haven't got an Asylum Surgeon's Ring, that's okay. You can bring a 6th Age Circuit if you've got one. You can bring a Lunar Ring if you've got one. You can bring just any ring, the best ring you've got that boosts up your magic, because that is what we shall be using, magic, so you need to improve it, yes? Makes sense. Moving on to number 9, the Luck of the Dwarfs. This is for luck boosting. If you haven't got a Luck of the Dwarfs, you can still bring a Ring of Fortune or a Ring of Wealth, because if you've got either of those, they may just so happen to be your best ring anyway. But, of course, the tier 4 luck boosting is going to be the best thing, which is why I have the Luck of the Dwarfs with me here. Number 10 is an enhanced replenishment potion. This just gives me 30% adrenaline every time I drink it, with a 2-minute cooldown. It's just nice after using your Sunshine Ultimate ability to get some free adrenaline to get your damage going a little bit faster. But, once again, that's not a requirement, not at all. And if you haven't got an enhanced replenishment potion, you can always bring a normal adrenaline potion or a normal replenishment potion. It's all good. Number 11 is going to be your staff. I have gone with a Noxious Staff. You can probably be okay with any sort of magic equipment that's at least tier 80, I want to say. You can do it with a tier 75 Staff of Light, because I have done that, and I will be showing an extra video later on at some point in the channel, but that's for the future. But yeah, I recommend at least tier 80 just to get some good damage in. So Virtus, Wand and Book, a Wand of the Cyware Elders and an Orb of the Cyware Elders, an Obliteration if you've got it, anything really, but I'm going with a Noxious Staff. And it goes without saying, if you've got better magic equipment, bring that. Number 12 is a Gothic Staff. You get this from the Mage Arena in the Wilderness. It's very useful for its special ability, where it takes away some of the defense of the enemy you're fighting. If you haven't got a good cape, you can also pick up a Guthic's cape while you're doing the Mage Arena. Which means at last we come on to number 13, which are the Rune Pouches. You saw that I used one rune pouch in the equipment section, but I have two extras. I have a large and a small, which allows me to use 8 runes between the 3 pouches. Now the only essential pouch really is the small rune pouch with blood and fire runes, because this lets you cast one of 2 spells. If you haven't unlocked the new spells that came out with Sentiston, you're going to be wanting to using Blood Barrage, which will give you a little bit of healing and actually still be very strong. But the more important spell, and perhaps the more useful spell out of the 2, is Exsanguinate. Now, why a spell called Exsanguinate works on an ice creature is beyond me, but it does, and it does a lot of damage. It stacks up very nicely, and you get to use the Rack and Ruin ability, which is just a buff to Rack ability, and it really helps your damage. So, if you don't want to worry about the spells too much, just use either Blood Barrage or Exsanguinate. If you choose to focus on just those 2 spells, you don't need all the rune pouches. In fact, you don't need any. Just get rid of the 2 pouches in the inventory and replace them with fire and blood runes, and you'll be good to go without any pouches whatsoever. However, you might also want to cast Incite Fear, assuming that you have unlocked the Sentiston spells, and to do so you need soul and water runes, and so you need extra runes to do so. The Incite Fear spell is really good. It lets you build up stacks, which will then allow you to cast Tsunami for 40% of its base cost, but if you add the Ring of Vigor onto that, you get an extra minus 10% off, so it becomes at 30%, which is exceptionally good for Tsunami, so I would thoroughly recommend switching between Exsanguinate and Incite Fear, just using an Incite Fear every minute, and then switching back to Exsanguinate. The final 2 spells here, and why we need so many rune pouches, are Spellbook Swap Standard and Vulnerability. Spellbook Swap allows us to cast a spell on the standard magic book, and Vulnerability applies a 10% bonus to the damage taken by an enemy for a minute. And you can see the Spellbook Swap here requires Cosmic, Astral and Law runes, while Vulnerability requires Soul and Chaos runes, hence the need for rune pouches. To cast, you can either use keybinds or just click directly from the spellbook. Click on Spellbook Swap, then click on Vulnerability, then click on your target, and it automatically fires. Before we get into the boss, and yes, I know it's been a very long time, thank you for sticking with me if you have, I just wanted to talk about my action bars and some abilities I've got. You see in the V slot I've got my shield to easily switch to that. Then in C I have a resonance, and in F I have devotion. These are both defensive abilities which we are going to use in the canon phase of this boss, and I shall talk about that more later. I've got Spellbook Swap bound to B, just to make that more accessible. And then I have my Sun Spear, Noxious Staff and Gothic Staff bound to various keys to make them easier to switch to. And finally I have my Special Attack bound to Control 1, so I can spam the Gothic Staff ability a bit more easily. Then in another action bar I have a few useful things. In E, R and T I have Deflect Melee, Deflect Ranged and Deflect Magic respectively. The magic one's particularly useful when we're using Devotion later on. I have Torment in the I slot, which boosts up my magic attacks and defense and whatnot. And in O I have the all-important Soul Split to give me healing forever. In P I have Vulnerability, so combined with the Spellbook Swap keybind it's very easy to access. And then at the end with the right square bracket I have Eat Food, just to make eating food a little bit easier. One more thing to add, I tend to use a Steel Titan Familiar because it's quite cheap and it gives you extra damage essentially. But if you're not feeling particularly confident, you can always bring a Beast of Burden, such as a Pack Yak, to bring extra food. Now with all that being said, let's get into the boss finally, shall we? And talk about the mechanics. Alongside his basic creeping ice attack, the Arch-Glacor has 5 mechanics. These are Flurry, Pillars of Ice, Exposed Core, Frost Cannon, and Glacyte Minions. You can turn each mechanic off. If they are all off, the Arch-Glacor has a total of 65,000 health, but if they are all on, he has a total of 365,000 health. The only mechanic which cannot be turned off is the creeping ice attack, and this accompanies all other mechanics. It's quite simple. A wall of ice will appear at the side of the arena. This can come from both sides of the arena, and if you get hit by the ice, you take melee damage, so avoid it at all costs. To aid in avoiding the ice, A thin trail will appear before the wall, telling you where it will stop. Not only is this useful to avoid taking damage from the ice, it also indicates which mechanic is being used, a fact which I will go into further detail later on. The first mechanic I would like to talk about is the Frost Cannon, as this is really the most dangerous one. We're going to be making use of our shield, switch and resonance, which I was talking about earlier in the equipment guide. The Arch-Glacor will turn into a cannon, at which point you want to equip your shield and use resonance. This will give you a massive heal. So in some ways this is actually quite a useful mechanic. If you fail to use this, however, the results are less than ideal, let's say. The creeping ice preceding the Frost Cannon can end up taking you to three places: the left, the centre or the right. This is actually the only mechanic which occurs to the left and to the right of the centre, so if the ice is heading there, you know to equip your shield. Instead of using a shield, however, there is an alternative. If you use the Devotion Prayer, which I also discussed earlier, combined with Deflect Magic, this will reduce the damage of the attack to 1. The next mechanic is the Pillars of Ice. An ice wall will emerge from the left hand side of the arena and go all the way to the right. Once again, you'll be able to tell this is the Pillars of Ice mechanic very quickly. The Arch-Glacor will fire down the beam. The best way to avoid this is to go to the top right corner and then run around it. A second beam will then spawn a little bit to the left, and you'll just run in between them. If you get hit by the beams, you will take a considerable amount of damage and lose prayer points. If you stand in the beam for too long, for instance if you get hit by the ice and get stuck, you will take a lot of damage and it will kill you rapidly. So avoid those beams. Another thing worth mentioning is that the beams will persist into the next mechanic, which makes it a little bit hard to maneuver sometimes when the ice is coming from the left. The next mechanic is the Exposed Core. 2 walls of ice will come into the centre from either side of the arena, locking you in, at which point the exposed core of the Arch-Glacor will fall onto the platform. You have to destroy one of the arms. The one to the left is weak to crushing damage, and the one to the right is weak to fire spells. Honestly, this doesn't matter, just use your standard abilities and you'll be out of there just fine, using your thresholds where appropriate. If you don't get out in time, you will succumb to the ice that emanates from the exposed core. At first it barely does any damage and you can soul split through it just fine, but it does stack up over time, as you can see here in this demonstration. You can also use Deflect Magic to mitigate that, as well as certain defensive abilities like Reflect, but you can see it very quickly stacks up and you will die if you're not quick enough. The next mechanic is Glacyte Minions. 4 minions, each with 2,500 health will spawn, and you have to kill them all before you can attack the Arch-Glacor again, because he is immune while any of them are alive. It's quite simple, you just use AoE abilities like Dragon Breath and Corruption Blast and Chain. When you do kill the minions, they drop an exposed core thing. It's kind of like a smaller version of the Arch-Glacor's core, and if you click on it, it does 1,249 typeless damage to the Arch-Glacor. There's also a little thing there, you'll see the Arch-Glacor's defense is bolstered. Don't worry about that, it just means you're doing loads of damage to him and the game is saving him, because you haven't done enough steps yet. The final mechanic is the Arch-Glacor's Flurry attacks. You can tell it's coming because the ice comes in from both sides, but not very far in, unlike the cannon and the core. And you have the message there saying the Arch-Glacor focuses its attacks. Now, as you can tell, the Arch-Glacor is using 2 attacks here. One is the magic attack, where his arm is at the back, and there's a blue particle effect around his arm. And the other is a ranged attack, where his arm is at the front, and it has a green particle effect. You can also tell a slight difference between the sounds as well. Now, you can use the deflect spells here, and they work with increased effectiveness in this phase. Or you can do what I do, and just use Soul Split. Heal right through the attacks, because I have enough DPS to where it's not even a problem. So in some sense, this is the easiest mechanic, because you don't even have to worry about it. Now I've gone through all 5 mechanics, I thought I would give a few tips and tricks. One thing to remember is that the Arch-Glacor performs the 5 mechanics in a rotation, so it has to do one of each mechanic before it can move on to a new rotation. So here, for instance, you saw the Arch-Glacor did a cannon attack, And now, since the ice is going into the middle, I know for certain it's going to be the exposed core, because it hasn't finished its rotation yet, so I'm confident there. That isn't to say, however, that the Arch-Glacor can't repeat itself. As you can see here, it's doing the Pillars of Ice thingamabob, and I'm avoiding it. I'm doing an amazing job as always, because I'm the best PVMer in the game. And then I notice, oh wait, it's doing it again. And this is because the first pillar was the end of the rotation of 5, and the second pillar is the start of the new rotation of 5, therefore allowing it to repeat itself. So watch out for that, don't get caught out. It can do it on the ice cannon as well, as you'll see later. Another thing I thought I would mention is trying to predict which mechanic is coming based on the ice wall. You can see there for the pillar attack that the little trail goes a long way across, whereas for the cannon it doesn't go as far. So in that sense you can tell which mechanic's coming and prepare accordingly. For instance, if you wanted to use a sunshine or not, you would change your tactics. Here for the core, it goes in quite far, but not particularly far. So you can tell it's a core from that. It's a bit difficult to see the difference, whereas for the cannon, I think for the cannon it went in a little bit further. But once again, it's hard to tell with the middle ones. But with the outer ones, it's much easier to tell what's coming and what isn't. Having said that, for the Flurry attack, the walls don't go in very far at all, as I discussed earlier, so it's very easy to tell that the Flurry attack is coming. Now with that out of the way, I'll show you some basic combat tips. I am using the Adrenaline Crystals at War's Retreat alongside the Persistent Rage Relic to let me enter the fight with 100% Adrenaline. If you don't have those, that's okay, just use the Replenishment or Adrenaline Potions as before, or don't use anything if you haven't got them. Then when I enter the battle, I drink all my potions, use my Sun Spear with the Plant of Feet switch for the Great Sunshine. Then I start building up my Incite Fear stacks, so I can cast a really good Tsunami at the start of the battle. You can see here, I'm switching to the Ring of Vigor, then using Tsunami. And it only cost me 20% Adrenaline. I'm not quite sure why it's so cheap, but that's how cheap it is, and it's a really good opener. Using the Guthic Staff is also great for the reduced defense it applies. And as for vulnerability, I cast it at the start of the battle, and then I also cast it whenever the exposed core ends, because there's a lull in the fighting I can utilise, which is really great. With all that finally being said, and yes I know there's a lot of stuff to say, thank you for sticking with me if you have, I'll just show you a live battle I had, and then I shall wrap up the video. Okay, so I thought now I would do a complete kill just to show you all my strategies and stuff like that. But before I get into it, there are two extra things I wanted to add. Firstly, auras. You can use any aura that you'd like, but Supreme Runic Accuracy and Maniacal are going to both be quite useful here. And the other thing I wanted to show you was my relic powers. I've got Fury of the Small, getting 1% Adrenaline extra with my basic abilities, and Persistent Rage, which means I don't lose Adrenaline outside of combat. If you don't have either of those, that's absolutely fine. You can use Font of Life, if I can find where Font of Life is, around here somewhere. There we go. Extra health, 500 extra health is always nice. But this really isn't that important at all. I've got my Steel Titan Familiar equipped. We're going to drink Elder Overload and Weapon Poison. We're going to pray. We're going to switch to them. And we're going to cast Vulnerability on the Arch-Glacor. I didn't have my preset quite right, so I didn't have the Sun Spear already equipped, but that's fine, it's not really a big deal. We're getting a cast of that, and then we'll switch to our Ring of Vigor and Tsunami, and then we'll switch to Exsanguinate. So this is either going to be the core or the cannon, and it's the core, that's fine. We're just going to attack the one on the left, because that's my preference. You shouldn't have any troubles killing these in a good amount of time. So it should deflect magic at the end there, just to avoid taking unnecessary damage. And our sunshine is almost back up, so I'm going to... Okay, focus its attacks, that's good. There we go. Sunshine's back up, and you can see I can soul split through this without any particular problem. You can also hear that the magic and ranged attacks have different sounds, which is quite useful to remember if you are in this situation. Should have enough time to cast another Tsunami here. Yeah, 30% adrenaline again. Very cheap. This is the beam attack, as it's coming from left to right, so I knew that already. And we're just going to walk like this. We took 1 bit of damage, but that's absolutely fine. Not a big deal. I might as well drink my potion now. This is going to be the cannon, because all the other abilities have been used. Going to use our special again. We're going to pray devotion and switch to deflect magic, and we're going to be absolutely fine through that. Switch back to soul split now. Now we are going to start a new rotation, so I don't know which ability he's going to use. Okay, he's using the cannon again. This is actually really good, as this has never happened to me before. Arch-Glacor's defense is bolstered, there's a good sign, it means we're doing loads of damage, so I'm going to use Resonance and my shield now. That was absolutely fine. We could have another cast of... Oh, I was using the wrong ring, but it's not really a big deal. We get minions again. Use stuff like chain. You've got it available to use. Then we use Tsunami, and then we'll switch to our Luck of the Dwarfs right at the end here. Try and kill him before he does the next ability, hopefully, and we do. And we get about 450,000 coins and some Dragonstone. That's not terrible. But you can see there, I didn't do everything perfectly, and it was still absolutely fine. I didn't have any problems. I had a decent kill time. Not the best that I've had, but not the worst either. Christ, what a marathon of a video that was. If you found any of this useful, I'm glad. I'm glad you found it useful. I'd be surprised, as it seems a bit rambly at points, but I think I got some good detail in there, right? This is a boss that I'm very much enjoying, and I've even tried the hard mode and done decently enough in it, so I thought I would share some tips and techniques with other people. If you did like the video, consider subscribing so you can see more videos when I decide to upload. If I decide to upload, that is. With that being said, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments about this boss or anything in general. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.